we don't have answers to real things. I know that's a very big blanket statement. I don't mean every church, but a great deal of them that I've interacted with or that you see on media, they don't have the answer within themselves because they don't have a resource within themselves.
I'm Todd, and I was naughty. I did everything wrong. I got kicked out of art school, I drank heavily, and I looked to other religions and versions of spirituality to get fulfilled. The problem was, I was in the occult and I didn't even know it. My life was a wreck, and I had to learn what it meant to have a relationship with Jesus.
And I'm Laura. I was super nice. I did everything right. I got saved young, went to Moody Bible Institute, got married, and followed the Christian rules to having a good life. Problem was, that formula didn't work. I had to change how I related with Jesus.
At the end of the day, what I learned is the very simple truth. Jesus is the answer, and the only one that will ever actually fulfill you.
Naughty
versus
nice.
Welcome back to Naughty versus Nice. Of course, I'm Todd.
And I'm Laura.
And I'm Kelly.
And producer overlord Kelly is running the boards right now. Yes.
So true. Scary today.
Yeah, you guys didn't hear what she said right before we started. We hit record.
Basically, she said, don't talk to the podcast people.
That's not quite accurate.
Close.
So we have been doing a series on divorce. We're going to wrap everything up. I know, right? So, welcome to the Christian Podcast. We're talking about divorce and abuse. Yay! So we've kind of covered the gambit on a lot regarding this topic and shown some areas that the church is weak in when it comes to the idea of even being able to recognize abuse happening inside the home in the first place, what that looks like, how it shows up on a person. And then not only that, but the solutions that the church seems to have usually seems to fall short. Once again, it's not all churches everywhere, but there are enough that we're doing this show and that we're kind of addressing the issue.
And I think part of the problem the church kind of has maybe skimming answers is because overall the church deals with almost everything in that way. If you start paying attention to popular media that's Christian, if you visit around churches, answers are very generic. You call it Christianity TM. So I think there's a lack of depth overall in the American church, and then therefore we don't have answers to real things. I know that's a very big blanket statement. I don't mean every church, but a great deal of them that I've interacted with or that you see on media, they don't have the answer within themselves because they don't have a resource within themselves.
And that's one of the reasons I think that part of the purpose of this show, and especially within your ministry, not only do you work with women that are in potentially abusive situations, but having that theology background and understanding the importance of all of this to be able to go forward, because the theology that you have and the relationship that you have with Christ is going to inform how you live your life, how you conduct yourself, and what you value and what you don't. What is important to you? And if you're operating from this easy breezy Christianity TM, greeting card, word a day, light and fluffy, everything feels good version of Christianity, you're not going to see the things that need to be seen, and you're not going to be of greater, wider service to those that, for many church leadership, have decided to take on that responsibility, felt a calling to be that shepherd for those people.
So today we want to give advice on how to do better? Is that what we're going to do?
We're going to hit some areas where we can give some structured help for people that are in that situation. So for the individual, we also want to talk to family and friends that might be suspicious that something's going on with a loved one that they have that is in an abusive situation. And then as well, also talk to church leadership and let church leadership know, look, guys, these are some areas you guys have fallen short in. Here's some ways and solutions to try to bolster things, move things forward, and kind of move things up to the modern era of where we're at and be able to recognize the things that need to be. Now, one of the criticisms that you and I have had regarding throughout the course of this series is this phrase that kind of keeps coming up over and over again, especially within church leadership. Well, he hasn't done anything yet, or any version of that. And you and I have both heard that, I don't know how many times, especially with the women that you work with. You've heard them say a version of that over and over. It's eerie just how many times certain phrases regarding certain things keep coming up over and over and over again. In that line, okay, I want to talk about a story real briefly about what's going on that you pointed to my attention. I mean, I heard it when it broke. This story broke, but I didn't really think anything of it at the time. And now that we're doing this series, there's a lot more going on here. And I think as this story gets wider and wider. So there's a woman by the name of Micah Miller, and she is married to a pastor at this church called Solid Rock Church. And this guy's name is John Paul. And she ended up ending her life tragically. And as a result, this whole entire thing kind of blew up. It wasn't necessarily that her tragic end and that opened it up, but the fact that this guy preached like 2 days later, and at the very end of the sermon, after delivering the sermon, said, "Oh, by the way, my wife is no longer with us." It was weird, and it was on video. And when people saw this event, all of a sudden they're going, "That's not normal human behavior. That is weird, man. That is weird." So police have gotten involved. There's been investigations, and a number of things have uncovered as a result of all this, including a number of people that were minors at the time that were being harmed by not only this pastor, but his father, the allegations are. And so these investigations are getting more thorough. And the reason I want to bring this up is technically, he hasn't done anything yet, according to the way many church leadership's response would be to claims of abuse or domestic violence.
Based on the fact that the system wouldn't find him guilty yet, or based on
the fact that she's the one that did it to herself, quote unquote.
I get. I thought you
saying?
meant for the other two women that had come forward, and I was like, well,
right. Well,
yeah.
even that goes into play at a certain point too. But my overarching point would be that being the threshold. He hasn't done anything yet. That's too far. That line is too far past the goalposts that, we've got to move that back. And I hope that leadership really hears this, because technically he didn't do anything yet.
And I encounter this a lot with a lot of people. I debate, and I think the more I feel the need to convince people, the more I probably come off as I see it only one way. But in conversations with normal people, they'll say, well, you don't know all the sides of the story, and, this is just what you're being told. But when you know what the patterns are and they show up on a story like this, it's kind of the same as when Rabbi Zachariah's story came out. Someone immediately said, I think it's somebody just trying to trip up somebody in, Christian media. And I said, you don't get women from different locations telling the same story and following the same pattern and it not be true. That's how you know this story fits the pattern.
Not only that, but there's even additional elements that I noticed. When somebody's faking it, they'll go into the trauma of the violation. They'll go into the trauma of the event. And that's hard to parse out. Maybe those details, if there's only one witness, okay? So we don't have a pattern of saying we can compare that to another woman's testimony that this person hadn't had access to. But a lot of times, and by a lot of times, almost every time, what you'll find is that person will have reached out before. And depending on the response that they get from the others around them, that's one of the ways that you can kind of corroborate the truthfulness of what's being told. There are similar elements in the way that humans behave and details that they'll pick up on and describe that the social pressure starts coming in from the outside, especially if the person is influential or important within that community. There is a similarity within the way that others respond with their social pressure that also is a violation to the victim as well. When somebody's making up, they'll talk just about that violation and everything else kind of falls away. But somebody who is genuinely harmed, they'll talk about that violation or violations, and there's the additional elements of the pressure, the social pressure, and the additional trauma that goes along with that reverberates out, so to speak. And
especially in these kind of organizations, I'm thinking more of the Rabbi Zacharias one, because this church and the schooling sounded kind of weirdish, but there is a need to protect the image. It keeps returning to that. So people might see it, they might hear it, they just don't want to deal with it. They don't want to see that that's a problem with somebody they respect. Whatever it is, there's a community responsibility that definitely falls into play, and people are failing to see it.
And that's one of the things to look for. So if you have somebody coming up to you and saying, I think that, something's not right in my marriage, and you say, have you mentioned it to anybody else? Yeah, I have. I mentioned it to a few people, but I get this really weird response from everybody. That's one of the things to look for, one of the indications. You're going to see this wider net, this wider thing, especially within Christian communities, the idea of kind of the pushback on some of these things. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up. We keep talking about it. Well, he hasn't done anything yet. He hasn't done anything yet. Technically, at the time of her ending her life, he hasn't done anything yet. And it was already too far. The signs were likely there and just not acknowledged or ignored. And in this particular case, it looks like there's a lot of criminal intent that's going on with what's happening there.
I think if I remember correctly from when it first came out, she had left once. That's also a pattern to look for if somebody has actually gotten out the door, but then she was encouraged by the church community to return. And I think that's what I hear when I talk with women. They finally tell somebody besides me, like a family member. It's almost oddly enough a family member who says, no, you don't want to get divorced. That, God doesn't like divorce, or, you're a Christian, you shouldn't get divorced, or something like you don't want to raise the kids by yourself, or you don't want to not have that. I just always like, what? I mean, that's a reason to stay in that situation. But there usually is somebody with a voice that's saying you shouldn't leave.
Life is hard anyways. And I don't mean to quite say it like this, but yes, it is hard to raise kids on your own. Yes, it is. But it's hard to stay in a situation where you're being abused and worrying about whether or not this tonight's going to be your last night or not. It's all difficult all the way around, and that's part of the purpose of the body. That's part of the reason the body needs to be educated about these subjects, so that way support can be given properly, appropriately, measured for the situation. And by education, once again, we also want to be educated so that way we can spot inauthentic and malicious phony baloney that some people who have a hardened heart could be trying to spread lies in order to harm an individual. I want to just acknowledge that does happen. Everything we're doing coming on the heels, or I guess maybe a little bit of distance, that whole Me Too movement, there were legitimate complaints and legitimate concern and legitimate abuse going on there. But there were also people that were making up stories in order to wield that as a weapon in order to apply social pressure as well as get revenge on people that didn't. So there's that balance that goes on there. Once again, we're talking about people that are actually in abusive situations. Real abuse is happening, and that's what we want to offer with the solutions today.
One solution that's just come on conversationally came out of what you were saying is the idea when I said that you don't want to raise your kids alone. And I kind of flip that with women, and I think it helps them see that if you stay with this man and we see the trend of his behavior and we can see it increasing, I can guarantee you what will be the outcome. But if you leave, that's a variable and you don't know what will happen, but it's a more hopeful option. You have a better chance of giving them the best start you can versus staying in this home that's very fake because it's just two people and one is abusive and you're staying. And again, I've said it before, kids will witness that and it will actually taint your testimony of the Lord to them and not encourage it just because you stayed. I don't even want to think what my kids would look like if we'd stayed. Every so often I think, what would our life have looked like? And I don't think it would just be 100% different and not for the better. So it is a Christian church lie that a paired home, what do you call it, a complete home, whole home? I can't think of the term.
Husband and wife inside, yeah.
Yeah, everything staying together.
A married family, yeah.
Yeah.
Intact.
That your children will turn out more successful or not. I get it. There's statistics. I don't go to church on Father's Day because every Father's Day they talk about how important it is that you have a father, and if you don't, you're going to end up in jail. I'm not kidding. That happened. So I don't like to hear it. I get it. It's harder. I get that there's some things that are missing and yada, yada, yada. But when you're looking at these unique, bad situations, I think I'd rather gamble on taking them out than leaving them in.
Kelly showed me a video, and it's this fella talking on like Facebook or whatever, just a random video. And if we can find it, we'll cite it. This guy basically says, he knows this guy. He's a real smart guy, and he's like a doctor or whatever. And this guy's talking to him saying, I think my wife is abusing me, and, I'm very successful. I've done very well. I have a successful practice. I employ a lot of people. By all the yardsticks and all the, this is a secular thing, by all the yardsticks and all the measurements, I have a very successful life. And my wife has just reminded me over and over again about how little I matter and how insufficient I am and how well I'm not doing. And, and so the therapist guy or whatever, he says to him, so let me see if I get this straight, okay? You're an adult and another adult is telling you for, 8 years, 10 years, however long you've been married, over and over and over again, that, you suck, you're not good enough, you're insufficient, you need to be more, you're not enough. And now you believe it. What makes you, and then at the same time, we're going to say, when an adult like that raises kids, has no effect on them whatsoever. This was done to an adult in just 10 years. What is done to a kid who's never been in any other environment for 18 to 20 plus years, and a lot of times these kids don't leave home until well into their 30s. what happens to them? We can see this is something, it gives us that pullback perspective view of why this matters. So like you were saying, people say, well, your kids will be more goofed up. Not more goofed up than being raised by a sociopath. Are you kidding? Like, at least they got a fighting chance.
Most days. Sorry. I always have to make a joke right there. Kelly was giving me a look, too. I was like...
I know, her head darted up real quick, and I said that. I'm like, what, did I say something weird? Like,
I don't know.
So let's go on a move in. In your experience, in just everything that you've kind of dealt with over the years and all the women that you've helped, what are some of the solutions that you think need to be front and center? What is every woman that's in an abusive situation, they're with somebody with a borderline personality disorder, what do they need to know that they don't know now? What do they need to get into their head?
Well, a lot of the advice that I kind of wrote out in preparation is for somebody who's actually ready to confront it, as far as, we're going to separate, I want to move forward, I want to bring other people in. Some things that I learned from mine that I would do differently now is, we've said it before, I would not have attended marriage counseling. When you have a situation like this, what I say to women is you have an incredibly abusive husband who has something that is his solitary issue, whether it be a sex addiction, whether it be just being an abuser, whatever it is. He is that, and that's not a marriage problem, that's a him problem, and it's the biggest problem in the room. I don't care if you can come to the table like most empathetic women do and say, well, sometimes I'm like this. That's a normal person failing. So we're not talking about a marriage problem. So you can get counseling on your own and he can get counseling on his own. You do not go to marriage counselor with somebody who's at that toxic level. That's my number one thing to say. I don't think it's a good idea. It was a very, very bad idea.
So really want to separate the idea of, a lot of times we associate the idea of marriage and the personality and the person and everything. It's all together this one jumbled mess, when we're actually, you've got behavioral disorder in the individual and then the concept or the idea of the covenant of marriage. There is a separation that needs to happen between that. And then once you're able to do that in your mind, now you can start looking at things, looking at reality of the way it's presenting itself, and start seeing it a little bit clearer than where you were at before.
I would also say it's sad, but it's true when you share with your family. Before sharing with your family, I think you need to be as objective as you can, and maybe that requires talking with somebody else, and decide. So in certain situations, women have been considering leaving the home. And I'll say, okay, who can you live with? And they list out their family members. And then I say, I want you to pick the person that's as black and white as possible on this issue, who doesn't care if you get divorced because you're in the church, who isn't going to waver, who doesn't think he's just a really great guy, who hasn't shown a pattern of these kind of relationships themselves. And then you live with that person. And if necessary, the other people just don't get to be a part of this, because once you've made the decision that you're really going to seek ending this, getting out of the situation, people can't waver. So if at all possible, be as objective as possible to pick people who will not keep wavering. So including family.
And that's a difficult thing to do, because you want to try to, especially if they're Christian, they're going to be applying pressure to you, whether they realize they're doing it or not.
In line with, this is all like what to do to get out. Seems like that's what we should title the lesson or the episode. If you're seeing a counselor, I think Kelly has said this before, if you're seeing a counselor and they aren't working, it doesn't matter if they make you uncomfortable, you don't feel supported, you feel like they're pressuring you to go back, whatever it is, you have the right to switch counselors. It can be a lot of work, you have to start over, but I've seen that happen and that can make a world of difference. I think what you're looking for is, as soon as someone says, well, I don't think you have grounds any longer. I don't respect anybody in the counseling field that uses that phrase. And I know that's a really bold, mean statement, but...
Actually, last weekend, Todd and I were at a seminar that had to do with abuse and counseling different people in it through the church and whatnot. And the speaker said that There's no such things as grounds for a divorce, and went into how we need to pay attention to the behavior and the pattern. And I was like, yay!
Yes, I feel very validated.
Yeah.
He was shockingly on point with a lot of the things that he said. He didn't seem to be at first, but the more he talked, and obviously he's giving a presentation to the general masses versus an individual one-on-one conversation. It was just reassuring to see at least there's another person out there that's a professional, been operating in this capacity, that sees a lot of the things. Like, he told a story, and at the, he didn't say it out loud, but Kelly went up and talked to him. She was like, well, what happened with that one? He was, they needed to get divorced. I mean, the guy said flat out, if, I'm not going to be a biblical husband if it means I can't treat her the way I've been doing it. And he's like, well, that's exactly what all of this means. That's the whole point of counseling. And at the heart of it, the hard-heartedness of it, there's many aspects that go along with that. So for, the idea of, maybe the biblical or maybe counseling isn't the thing they should both be doing, but should the victim of a circumstance like this get counseling at all if they have the means to do that? Or what would they want to be looking for?
I'm going to say yes, they should. I think it's hard. Usually the women I've dealt with have kids, and if they've separated, then they're dealing with childcare, they're dealing with that kind of stress. It is hard to make those steps. Like, you're already making this huge step to just address the problem or to separate or to leave, whatever stage you're in it. So then to say, okay, I'm going to sit down with this woman and say, these are the 15 things that I think you need to do right now. If they don't feel ready to find a counselor, I just encourage them to have either meet with me again, or there's another woman that in our community that works with women, meet with her again, or find that's on the list of solutions is if you have your one person who you're ride or die, they're not going to change their mind. They're not going to be suckered into any of his
bologna sandwich.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was thinking of all the things I can't say. So that person, you find one person, and that's the person you can call, and say, he said this. Is that right? Am I wrong? Because you will have almost a befuddlement about how to see reality for years after this is over. I think someone told me after my divorce that it takes half the amount of years that you were together to retrain your brain to not see it the way they wanted you to see it, and that is absolutely true. So you cannot expect people who are going through this to be able to see it with the clarity you do. So if you know, hey, this person would really benefit from counseling, but the idea of getting in the car once a week and driving to a counselor is absolutely overwhelming, don't push it. Just say, okay, but just establishing as much as possible the connection with one person who will support them unwaveringly. That's, I think, the most important thing. Again, with the counselor, I think look for someone, again, who you feel comfortable with. And depending on the issues, I think if there's been any kind of sexual abuse, stuff that we were talking about last week, I do recommend seeing a specialized counselor for that. I think there's a difference between that and the experience of being with somebody who isn't and the one of being with someone who is. So I think those are some things to look for in a counselor.
I know that within the world of counseling, especially Christian counseling, there's kind of like a difference between a Christian counselor versus a biblical counselor. Do you have any thoughts on that, or a quick breakdown of maybe the difference? I'm a little spotty on some of it, so I'm not 100% on what exactly the differences are.
I was told a couple of years ago by my mentor, who's kind of in the world of women's ministry. She's a professor at Moody, that to avoid biblical counselors versus, and then the Christian would be what you'd lean towards. But the program you guys went through on Saturday is labeled as biblical counseling. So I was impressed by that.
And that was I went in leery because of that. And I was shocked at how much, because I was told they make things too black and white. And if it's said in the Bible, this is how it's handled in the Bible. So I was really pleasantly surprised when the speaker went into how it goes back to the principle, which especially we had just recorded, the episode where you were talking about the principle and the heart of Leviticus and the protection of women and stuff. And it was like, oh, I don't know if this is exactly what I've always been told it was. But I'm sure it probably comes down to each institute also, and really looking at what they're teaching and what their reviews are and things like that. But yes, the fact that he was like, let's talk about the principle of this. The principle is this man is hard-hearted and stuff. It was really good.
I think there was one gal I dealt with once that she and her husband were in some kind of program. I'm going to try to look it up. I wrote a note in my notes to look that up so we can maybe even reference it and have Kelly put it as like not trustworthy one. That sounds terrible. I can't remember the name of it, but it felt a little bit like the people who'd gone through it went to like a biblical counseling program for 6 months and got a certificate, that kind of thing. I'm not poo-pooing that. I think that there's value in people moving forward and trying to train people in the church. But this program in particular was one of the shifting grounds. And well, he's sorry now, and you no longer have grounds, and you have to take him back. And that was a female counselor telling her that, and that really bothered me. And so, as a principal, I would look for a Christian counseling organization. And again, a good counselor, you can see them, and they probably won't. You won't walk away from your experience with them knowing exactly what they believe theologically, because I don't think their role is to tell you that. I think my counselor I don't know what her views are on some things. She's that good at just making sure she is bringing forth things in your own understanding, your own thinking, to come to your own conclusions. So that would be my warning on that.
So if you had one question or two questions to ask any therapist that hey, meeting them for the first time, what would those questions be to give you an indicator or an indication that this is, just kind of off the cuff, this is the best counselor for you or your situation or what's going on? Kind of an on-the-spot question.
If you were going to ask them two questions to verify that, not just...
I don't know, whatever. Yeah,
I didn't know if it was like two observations, two questions. I'm being technical.
No, but I mean, like
how... I'm trying to come up with an answer.
You're in a real difficult situation. You're an abused, housewife. You got 3 kids. You're trying to do all this stuff in secret, and you got to try to figure out and parse out, is this therapist actually going to help me, or are they going to try to, convince me to go back, 2 months later, I'm actually in the wrong, and I'm going to go get tuned up again,
Something that I would look for, if I were going to ask a question now, looking back, I would say, what are your views about divorce and remarriage? And that's going to tell you a whole lot right there, because if they're not comfortable with the idea of you divorcing or even remarrying, they're going to lean that way in their counseling, and they're going to keep putting you back in. The other thing is, I think, genuine empathy. I think if you've ever tried different counselors, there's some that you just don't see the issue. And I think that's something that has connected for myself, for other women, is somebody who will see the abuse in the smallest nuances, and not just where we as a victim will look for it is, did he smack you across the face? Everything below that line, we're not convinced about, because it's not it's not, what's the word?
He hasn't done anything yet?
Yeah, well, that. Yeah, it's not concrete.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm excited when I can remember a word. It's not a concrete thing. So I would look for somebody who understands abuse in a nuanced way. That's probably difficult to ask in a first session and really get an honest answer on. But if you know what you're looking for, I think you can see it within 3 sessions.
I think there's something to be said for, not only do you want somebody with the expertise of the academic understanding of all of the nuance that goes into a situation like this, but also has the heart behind it, of which they genuinely want, they have a heart and a compassion for the individual that's in front of them. And they see them as an actual person. They don't see them as a pawn piece on a chessboard to shuffle around, so that way they can make sure to maximize whatever financial thing they got going on with their practice or whatever. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these things that we've talked about right here, just as far as solutions for the individual, you might have a few other things on your list, of course, but I want to make sure to kind of really clarify this, that there are many pieces of that, I got to run with the chessboard analogy. You kind of want to get in place before you start trying to make a plan that's going to help you escape the situation. Many times, people will have to do this in secret, and you don't want to go have one therapy session, then try to figure out how you're going to get out. And maybe you have to. I don't know. Everybody's situation, I guess, is a little bit different. The overall point that I'm trying to make is that sometimes, in many cases, you're going to have the most successful attempt to make that break, get out and get that separation that you need by putting a few ducks in a row first, getting that friend who's always in your corner no matter what, if that's an option, or you have a person like that, in order to give you the bolstering, in order to give you the encouragement, and maybe even help drive you around or get things done for you that you need done, in order for you to be able to get out of that situation.
And I will have Kelly put in the show notes. We'll look up a few websites that are available. So if you're the ride or die friend, that's a resource for you, because when you're getting ready to leave, it is so very hard to do that you really, you need to see in the victim that they're ready to leave, but you need to understand that they might need you to just pull them through the doorway a little bit because it's such a hard decision to make. But you can look at these websites. They kind of go through some things to have in line. I've had 1 or 2 times that somebody has called me and I thought, oh, they made their decision fast and we got to come up with a list. And so what you can do if you're the ride or die person, or if you're in a frame of mind that you can as the one leaving, is sit down and make a list of things that you want to make sure you cover. In some cases, I think it's a good idea to get your hands on money, because as soon as you've upset the boat, that can get shut down really fast. I was advised to leave a decent amount of money in the bank for him, but to take out as much as I could because I would be taking care of the kids. It sounds mean, but he's put you in that position, so that's his fault. Sorry, I don't feel bad for you. The other thing is, if you have children or just your own stuff, medical records, Social Security cards, any kind of backup paperwork that you might need if you never got to get in that house again. That's something I would make sure you have. You've got, as far as like in my situation and in a few that I've dealt with, you've got that one person who's going to be there that day. If it's done confrontively, there needs to be somebody with you or somebody waiting in the driveway or something, because if he's in the home and you're packing stuff to leave, it can get very confrontive. So be ready, even in that situation, for the backup person to call the police. Nobody wants to do that because it seems embarrassing or overreactive. It's not. They get calls like that all the time. It's okay. They can come and stand on your porch while you pack your stuff. They'll do that. I'm trying to think of the other things. For sure, obviously you've made a plan to who you're going to stay with. That's the case. In situations where we might be able to get the guy to leave, you can either have a confrontive conversation where you've got your ride or die person with you or police presence, and you say, I'd like you to leave. Would you consider leaving? And if they refuse to leave, you'll say, that's okay. I've got a bag packed. I'm ready to go. And that's how ready you have to be when you have the conversation. You don't let him know ahead of time you're thinking about this. You don't talk about how you might be leaving. You decide and you become very firm in that in your own thinking. Give yourself time to be sure. Then you make your plan. You have everything ready. And then you tell him. And then that's how you walk out the door. If he leaves, fine, great. If you feel pretty solid this is going to be a definitive thing, start to pursue the legal procedure of getting your locks changed. And before you can do that, if you feel physically unsafe, you get on Amazon, you buy those, I don't know what they're called, basically it's a long stick you put on the doorknob and it locks the door no matter if they have a key or not. Don't be afraid to protect your home like that. Nobody's going to come at you for doing that. Everyone's like, well, isn't that illegal? No, I don't think so. Look at me giving legal advice. Welcome to Naughty versus Nice. Free legal advice from Laura. I'm trying to think, is there anything else that's come to your mind that we've talked about before?
One of the other things I would definitely mention is that you're going to have a gut feeling of whether or not you're actually going to be walking out the door or not. Like, you're going to know before you get into that conversation. Obviously, have witnesses if it's got to be the cops. Ideally, also somebody from your church, somebody in leadership. But that's in more leadership solutions I would like to mention. But here's the key point. If you have that confrontational conversation with your abusive spouse, and then you're like, I'm going to leave, and then you go walk into the other room, go grab your bag, go grab your purse, go grab your stuff, go grab this and that, and then you're going to storm out the door, there's a good chance the abusive person's not going to really be in alignment with that idea immediately. So those items, that stuff, if you're going to have that conversation, needs to be outside the house already. Whether that's at your trusted friend's home already, whether that's in your car, I don't know what the situation is. It's best for you. Some people live in an extremely rural environment, and other people live in a more metropolitan place where their husband and wife, they don't even own a car. They just rely on public transportation of major city. So whatever your situation, when you say, then I'm leaving, the next steps have to be out the door. They can't be to the kitchen to get a glass of water first, and they can't be to make sure that you've got enough of your medication that you need. You need to have all that stuff prepared in advance. I would say even talk to your physician, explain the situation, and say, look, I need to have an extra prescription for 3 months or whatever of my medication. If it's a life-saving medication, it's not regulated or controlled. You want to make sure to have all this stuff all ready and all set. So when you say, then I'm leaving, that's the last word you say until You start having the regulated, controlled conversations that have parameters put on them through text messaging or email where there are witnesses involved.
And yeah, I like that idea that everything. When we left, I packed the car and everything was in place. And then we had a story basically lined up, and I was going to leave. And I'd asked the pastor to give him a letter from me because they were going to meet, and explaining that I had left. And that worked well. So that's something that can be done, that you could arrange it with somebody in your peer group, in your church leadership, somebody who would deliver that message for you, and you can leave in secret. Somehow leaving in secret for people, I think women in the church, my experience, other women's experience, it feels like a bad thing. Like you're betraying, and I'm going to tell you, if you have to lie to get out, you lie. That is not the heart of being told not to tell false testimony. Is not anything like this. I call it a Rahab lie. It becomes, I use that for a lot of things, but for this one, I'm actually serious. You do whatever it takes to get out, whatever it takes. That is not a moral issue at that point. So yeah, definitely have the car packed, have it ready. I like the idea about the medicine. That's a good one. I hadn't thought about that. And then do not reveal to anybody where you're going if you're leaving in secret that would end up telling him. And if possible, hide your car wherever you're going to stay, that kind of a thing. I would keep your support group small. I don't know if that was implied in our other answers. I had way too many people on the table, and I gave them all way too much authority. It is okay to just pick one or two people that's who I listen to, and everybody else, it's kind of like, that's nice that you think that, but it's not going to make it to the table. So keep that small. If you have separated and you've kind of gotten out the door, there's usually emotional upheaval from the abuser. It's very fair to say, listen, for 6 weeks, I need space from you. You are welcome to see the kids. We can arrange that. But we're going to only communicate email and text. There's apps now available for co-parenting. They didn't have that when we split. But that's an excellent one because it's evidence. I have so much evidence. And so to have it in printed word, it's helpful for you later. It's helpful for your kids later, but it's also just helpful if you need it legally. But it's essential to take out all the emotion for yourself. This is a huge step to have left. So to limit him to only talking kids and finances, it becomes an easy boundary. It's not foggy. He brings up a personal topic. Nope, it's not kids. It's not finances. I'm not going to respond. And then you just don't. I even recommended, I recommend to people, and it's what we did, is for that 6 weeks, somebody else would transport the kids, somebody I trusted would transport the kids back and forth for visitation, so that was still being, taking place, but without having to put the emotional pressure on the situation. I think the last thing I have is remember that the church is for advising. Leadership does not have authority over whether you have to reconcile your marriage or not. They don't have any authority over what you do with your marriage. A good elder, a good leader would encourage you to soberly consider getting married or soberly consider getting divorced. Both sides of that. That's the role of leadership, is to advise and to support. But even if they disagree with your decision, they disagree. You don't have to listen to the church. That's a cult when you think you have to listen to them.
Yeah, I always say there's only two places that asking questions or questioning the authority of leadership is not allowed. The first place is the military, and the second place is a cult. Absolutely any other organization or institution, it is allowed, it is appropriate, and it is measured in order to do so. Obviously, it's...
So I know we've done quite a bit on just the individual, which is important because it all starts there. You got to resolve within yourself. It helps to have a plan. I would only add on that something I do with women is if we're on the phone, I write down everything, and then I tell her, I'm going to text this to you as soon as we're off the phone, because there's no way I can overemphasize enough. The brain is on an emotional short circuit. It's like it's just enough that you've decided to do this. Everything else feels like way too much. So if somebody's listing it out and making it a black and white thing, that really helps. And that goes kind of into, I just have a few things for if you're a person who is going to walk through this with somebody. I put on my notes, count the cost. If you can't do this, there have been friends of mine who've had situations come across their table in ministry that they have known they cannot commit to walking through with that person because it's just not something they can do. It is okay to decide that you can't be a part of that person's support group as long as obviously they have someone. It will cost. It will be a very long haul. It's at least a year of just upheaval and things like that. So if you are going to be that person for someone, you count the cost, you commit, and then you don't leave the table. Some people left the table, and that's just it. Live and learn. Just consider it if you're that friend. You going back to the escape plans, that would be something I would consider something you can help with. You help them construct a plan. Thinking logically is very difficult, so it's good to have someone doing that stuff. Never ever assume that this couldn't have been you. We can tell when you think that. So I'm glad that never happened to me. We've talked about that endlessly, but just this idea that I would never let a man do that to me. I would never let this or that. I would never freeze. I would always fight. I'm a fighter. All of that stuff's easy to say, but you haven't been brainwashed for 15 years. So try. It's hard. There are things that I see other people do and I think, well, I wouldn't have done that. Try really hard to put a cap on that if it's there.
It's real quick. All you got to do is think back to a time somebody lied to you and you believed them and then you found out later that was a lie. That's the mindset that you just have to be in, just to recognize in order to have that empathy and go, the only difference between the situation that I have lived through that I can relate to is the scope of the lie, the quantity of lies, and the duration in which the lies have been conducted and how your entire life gets wrapped up in them versus I just lost $20 over being lied to by somebody in a con or whatever. That's the key difference with this. It's not that a normal person can't relate. We all can. We just can't relate to the size, the scope, the depth, and the magnitude. And that's where you've got to get into that mindset if you're the friend and you're going to be the one that's going to help. You've got to understand that. Saying, yeah, I would never get fooled. Really? You've never been fooled. You've never been lied to. You've never believed something that's not true ever in your entire life. You've only believed what is 100% true always. Not likely. I'd like
to meet them if they're that way.
Right. Look, it's easy to say and how many times, well, I would never, if that was happening to me, I wouldn't put up with it for a second. Really? When was the last time you thought that somebody was actually going to reach out and just end your life right there? That's never happened before. Then you don't know what you would do. You don't know. If I was standing in front of a grizzly bear, I'd give me a break. Come on, man. Yeah, that's not how it works. You never know how you're going to respond to a dangerous situation. You never know how you're going to until you're in it. And to judge another person for not acting the way that you've imagined how you're going to be, that is not helpful in the slightest.
The other thing I thought of while we were talking was that the support person needs a support person. Just a way to have somebody else coming along and saying, either with the victim as well, or just on the side, a way you can kind of have a break from it. And so, this kind of goes to the friendship. I remember at some point, obviously you've got the emergency time, the first, few weeks after it all happens, but you have to try to remember to ask your friend. So if you are the victim and you've got this person that's walking through it, you ask them about their life. You talk about other things. You make sure your conversations and your friendship have other aspects to it as much as you can. It's going to be the more eclipsing event for a long time, but that is a way to take care of that friendship so that it's more than just this issue when it's over. I think it's something somebody said to me, and I think it's a really good idea to remember that.
Absolutely. So what else can friends and family expect, or what would they want to be looking out for when it comes to how they can support or how they can be helpful?
It's really hard for family to stay in their lane. And I think for the most part, my dad did a pretty good job with that. It was a struggle. It is a real struggle. When you do feel the need to step in, there's certain things different people throughout the time would say, well, I think you should pursue him for more money, or you should do this, or, if, you should say this to him or whatever, not keeping in mind that it's a huge step that I've just left this situation. For me to create more conflict is not always the best idea. And I get it. There's parts of us that, for the sake of righteousness, we want to see this person put in their place or paying their due or whatever it is. but acknowledge how far this woman has come to do what she's doing, and respect that, and make sure you're articulating that, because I think words are so much more important than we give them credit for in our relationships. But just somebody who's saying, this took incredible amounts of courage. This is big. I can't believe you did this. Those kinds of things really help. So I think a family member that can do that. We're often just caught up in our own anger over what's happened, or on the flip side, you've got people who will want you to get back together. I think they still need to stay in their lane. And you need to know, as someone who's left, that all of your relationships, that those people will still have a relationship with you if you leave. I felt like there was some tension in my life about, if I'd stayed, I would have lost some people. If I'd left, I would have lost some people. It just added a stress to the decision that didn't need to be there.
There's something I want to kind of throw in here and piggyback on what you're saying. If you're the friend or family member that recognizes kind of what's happening, and you're going to be, helping out, understand it'll be similar to the feeling that the victim is going to have in the sense of the isolation of things. If you try to get support from your friends and your family, explain what's going on and why you're involved with Susan Bubblegum trying to get out of this situation with Johnny Football Hero, they're going to look at you, especially if they're Christian, they're going to look at you a little bit side-eyed too. You're going to get a little taste of what it's like to be disbelieved, to, maybe it's not as bad as you think it is. Are you sure that was actually what happened? I mean, you weren't in the room. So you've got to be, if you're going to be that solid rock and foundation for this person and walk through them with this for a year, you are going to have a trial of endurance as well. Not only that, but if you're married, you got to get your spouse on the same page with you. Mm-hmm. You guys have to be there and have to be willing to go through this situation together. Kelly and I, for example, she's worked with a number of people that have similar situation here, but it's not marriage, it's more psychological distress, emotional distress. And Kelly's helped a number of people over the years with that kind of situation. If we weren't together and on the same page, we weren't able to discuss what's going on. If we didn't both have a foundation, an understanding of psychology, emotional development, behavior, and these things that matter, the conversations she would have with me would be very, very different. Over time, they would come across as being unsupportive. They would come across as being uninterested. They would not be as edifying and beneficial to her so that she can continue doing what it is that she's doing in order to help these other people. So
I was just going to, because there were times where very last minute we would have to open our home and let somebody stay and whatnot. So you had to be on the same page. You had to be willing that if I got that call, to drop what I was doing and what you were doing and go get that person, bring them back. You had to know then to disappear and let me have one-on-one time with them and talk them through whatever was happening and whatnot. So we had to stay strong in our communication, because otherwise I would have been ineffective in what I was trying to do to help the person. Yeah,
all of a sudden you need to leave. It's 9 p.m., but you need to leave for 3 hours. Okay. That's what has to happen then. So there's a heart behind it. It's not just the friend. It's not just the family member, but their immediate thing. And like I said, expect that your friends and family probably won't support you as you help support your friend that's going through this or family member.
There's a very powerful part to be played by the husband of the friend. I'm assuming a lot of things here. My best friend obviously was married, so that's my situation. But having a male voice agreeing with her, it just, especially having been raised in the church, in the atmosphere we have with a view of how men see things, to have another man agreeing that this was wrong and being a kind of like in a lab test, he's the normal factor. This is the thing you're looking at. That has an incredibly strong role to play as well, because you need agreement from your community, and it does help to have that from the male voice.
The other thing is, if you're family or friend and you're suspicious that there's an abuse situation going on, you know for a fact, and they've asked you for help, you need to get educated. No more of this nonsense flouncing about, having opinions about something you literally know nothing about. You need to understand borderline personality disorder. You need to understand narcissism, sociopathy. You need to understand how they actually go about their manipulative tactics, what diffusion tactics are that actually exist, how to interact with them. You need to understand the emotional and and psychological strain and stress that other people get put under, you need to understand you're about to be attacked too. You got to get educated. And this nonsense where it's like, I'm just going to talk to them in a firm voice, that's not going to work. It doesn't work. These are not people that think and process in the way that you do. They do not have much in common with you. They're different. They're very, very different. They have no problem telling a lie and will have almost no indication they're doing it and never think anything of it. Behavioral disorder people they're just different. The other part of it is, you got to get grounded in what Scripture says. No more of this flouncing, having a passive word-a-day calendar, easy breezy understanding of what the Bible is, what it says, and how it and God's system that He put into place for us to get to know Him better. You've got to understand who God is. You've got to learn what His attributes and characteristics are. You've got to be able to identify when God is present in a situation and it's pretending to be God in a situation. You've got to start getting that discernment. And if you're walking through another individual that's going through the trauma of divorce and the trauma of separation, your relationship needs to get strengthened too, because if you're not growing in Christ, anyways, you're doing it wrong, but you especially you're about to get accelerated into who God is and put all of your trust, leaning, and understanding on Him and His perfect will in order to make sense of anything you're about to go through over the next, and it's not just like a year. We're talking the reverberations that go off from this are the rest of your life.
Unfortunately. Yeah, I was trying to come up with a funny way to say, I don't know what you're talking about. That's never happened to me.
Right. So we've kind of run long with this, and we're going to do a part 2 episode on what church leadership can do. So stick with us for that. But to kind of wrap everything up here with what's going on, understand that if you're going through a difficult situation, you're thinking you're involved in an abusive relationship, and you need to get out. There are some ducks that you're going to want to get in a row in order to be able to start moving in that direction and get some things in place. And hopefully you can find that trusted friend or family member that's going to be able to do that walk with you. And if you are that person and you're seeing what's going on in a relationship and in somebody that you care about, and you're going, something's not right here, you got some groundwork hopefully to start putting some pieces in place in order to be able to move on to the next thing that God has in store for you. So thank you very much for sticking with us for this episode. You can reach out to Laura, Kelly, or myself at naughtyversusnice@gmail.com. That's naughty, VERSUS nice @gmail.com. And we'll have that part 2 coming up. We'll talk to you next time.